Hello there, what is going on everyone? Today we're going to be talking about Star Wars Armada and the Clone Wars, what may actually be coming. We're also going to be talking about the leaks that came out of Europe and what I think that means for you guys, what I think we're going to see showing up in particular expansions, and much, much more. Alright, so if you are new here, I do want to remind you there's still time left to enter to win the giveaway. All you have to do is be a subscriber and leave a comment on this or one of my videos. I'd love to hear from you guys. What do you really want to see in Star Wars Armada as the Clone Wars arrives and we start getting more and more content for this game? What are some of your most wanted ships, some of your most beloved ships? What do you really hope to see from this game? And maybe I guess some things that are going to be right. Now, I will also kind of credit this with a disclaimer. I have no knowledge of exactly what is coming, so really all I know is what FFG has kind of put out and some things that they have leaked as well. But speaking of leaks, let's talk about the leaks out of Europe that normally I wouldn't really just talk about leaks that much, but these do look pretty legit, and we already know that Clone Wars is coming anyway, so FFG's already announced that. So if this is fake, well then good job trying to fake out stuff that seems legit. I've already talked about the Armada Dial Pack and the Armada Upgrade Card Collection in previous videos. So if you want more Armada news, you're in the right place. Make sure you click that subscribe button. Make sure you click that bell for alerts so you don't miss out on more Star Wars and Star Wars Armada content, as well as board gaming content. But today I want to focus on the top couple of things, and these are the Galactic Republic Fleet Expansion, the Separatist Alliance Fleet Expansion, Republic Fighter Squadrons, and Separatist Fighter Squadrons Expansion. First off, these leaks that we've been getting from distributors and retailers, they seem legit because they haven't been wrong yet, at least in this type of way that they're being presented. And because it seems that Asmodee in North America does everything as far as business and releasing and information very different than Asmodee in Europe. It just seems like they're getting all the news and the releases on a completely different schedule than we are. So everything about this seems legit to me. So what does this really mean? Well, first thing, I do want to showcase a little piece of art. This was actually from a video I did a while back after Gamma, when they did the Gamma trade show in Las Vegas, and this was the first piece of artwork that we've seen about, and this was actually a thumbnail from one of my videos, so you can check that out too. If you want to look up Armada, Clone Wars, and Crabbok on YouTube, you're going to find all of these videos that I've done. But this was the first piece of art that we've gotten from them. And this is going to kind of lean itself a little bit into some of my predictions, but it doesn't necessarily mean that this is what we're getting first. But we do see an Acclimator and what appears to be some consular cruisers here. So this is kind of exciting because this was the first like ship-based artwork. We have had a couple of cards that were previewed also, but they don't really tell us what ships that we're getting. So I'm going to leave those to their own videos. I've already done videos about the cards, and we'll probably talk more about those and other previews that we get as news becomes available. But I want to talk about, let me go back to the leak here. The first thing is, it seems like the Galactic Republic Fleet Expansion Pack and Separatist Alliance Fleet Expansion Pack are basically single faction starters. They may not actually be full-blown starters, but it looks to be that they might actually be single faction starters. And if so, that's a fantastic idea. It seems like a great way to get new players into the game for a fraction of the cost, because that's really one of the biggest barriers to entry in Star Wars Armada, is that, hey, it's $100 core set, and you've only, if you're playing like Empire, you only get one ship to start you out. So the value wasn't really there, especially when you compare it to FFG's other games that have cheaper buy-ins and or more valuable buy-ins where you get more stuff and more content for your game all in one box. And so I think this is an attempt to target that. That's always been my biggest criticism of the way that they're doing things, is that that core set was so expensive and such a big barrier to entry for a lot of new players who are on a budget. The good news is, once you get past that, once you're into the game, it's a very, very cheaper game to maintain because it doesn't have a very, very fast rate of new expansions coming out. Most factions tends to get about one new ship a year. That's kind of been the average lately. And so it's very easy to, buy maybe a $40 or $50 ship once per year. It's compared to other games which get new content every month. So your cost to maintain relevance and maintain with the newest stuff is very, very low once you get past that barrier to entry. And this is going to really allow more players to get into the game, if that's indeed what these are. So my guess is that for a single faction starter, we've seen, because we've seen different formats. X-Wing did kind of single faction starters, but they didn't have everything you needed. You still needed to have the starter because you still needed dice and movement stuff and damage decks and rules and all of that other stuff that came in the actual starter. I hope desperately that these do not also require you to have the core game's starter, because that would increase the barrier to entry for a new player who's looking to play Clone Wars, because now they have to buy a $100 starter that has ships that they don't even need. So, yeah, I don't think they would make that mistakes, because I think that would basically be shooting themselves in the foot. What I expect these to be is single faction starters, and if that is so, then it's great. Now, I think these will probably try to come in at somewhere around half the price point that Armada does right now. So probably somewhere around $50, maybe a little bit more though, because you do have to box them all up separately, and there may be some extras. I don't know if they'll have any squadrons with them or not, and I actually think they probably don't need to have squadrons in the box, and that's what the Squadron Packs are for. I think you sell more things a la carte this way, hence my discussion heavily on what the dial pack is and what that could mean. But put more things a la carte and decrease the overall cost of each box. Now, if the cost is going to be cheap, I think that means each of these fleet expansions are going to be 1 or 2 ships each. I don't think you're going to get 3 ships like you got in the regular core set, and I don't think you're going to get 3 ships plus a whole bunch of squadrons like you got in the core set. That's one of the things that contributes to a $99 price tag. So I think we're likely to get 2 ships in each of these fleet expansion packs. And I think that I think for it to be called a fleet expansion pack, I think it needs to have more than 1 ship. I think 2 ships is the minimum. Now, it could have more than 2 ships, but it might have a duplicate of a certain type of ship, like we've seen in X-Wings, Separatist, and Republic kind of starter boxes where they had 1 of one and 2 of another one. And that is certainly an option. But I think that might increase the cost a little bit too much if you still bring in 3 ships in one box. So I think for Armada's sake, it would make the most sense for them to have 2 ships, 1 of one and 1 of another, in each of these. And I'm going to give you my predictions for them. So with that said, let's go ahead and jump in. I want to talk about Separatists first. So the first ship I think that might be in this fleet expansion is the Munificent Star Frigate. This is what I think will be a medium ship, so still kind of on the bigger size, but it's also a very recognizable Separatist ship. This one is maybe one of the most recognizable Separatist ships, and the Separatists fielded a lot of these, so this would be a very, very common ship for you to get. If they ended up doing 2 of one ship and then 1 of another, which would make them a little bit more expensive, then this one might be the one that you get 2 of in this particular pack. That's a possibility. After that, I think if we're going to go for I think they could get a larger ship by going with the Recusant class light destroyer. This one, it's harder to get an exact size approximation, but according to Legends, they ranged them everywhere from about 1,100 meters to 2,500 meters for the larger variant, so these came in different sizes. This one could go in a couple of different directions depending on the size that they settled on with Lucasfilm and licensing. It could be large or it could be medium. So that you could be, and if they end up doing this one as a medium, then that would mean that you got 2 medium ships for these guys, which could absolutely work. Now, I think that these 2 are probably going to be in the start, but if not, they might also go with the Providence class Dreadnought. This would be a larger ship, comes in 2 different varieties, one that's about 1,000 meters, one that's a little over 2,000 meters. So depending on how they do that, could influence, maybe you get one that might be medium size, might still be large, and then the larger version would definitely be large. I could see them doing something like that too, but I feel like this is a more recognizable ship, and this ship would do very well as a single ship expansion pack rather than coming in the starter. I don't think the Recusant is pretty enough to do well as an expansion, so I think this one deserves to be in a starter. And the Munificent could go either way. Actually, since there's so many of these, I think for a ship that is very, very abundant in the Clone Wars, it makes more sense to do a double of this one. Have this one as its own expansion and put it in the starter. That's what I think, because there'll probably be a lot of titles for ships like this, and so I think that makes sense to do that way. But we'll see. I mean, there's a lot of titles for all of them. There were a lot of battles fought. Other ships that they will eventually do, I don't think we'll see in the starter, are things like the Subjugator, the heavy cruiser, the really, really big one. You may recognize the Malevolence from the Clone Wars with the big ion cannon. I definitely expect that to show up. And the Lucrehulk also. I do think that those particular ships, though, are very, very likely to show up as huge ships, though. The Subjugator heavy cruiser is easily large enough to be a huge ship. Doesn't have to be as big as the Executor to still count as a huge ship, because this thing was massive, massive, massive. And the Lucrehulk, while still being a good chunk larger than an Imperial Star Destroyer, but due to its round base, like the Lucrehulk isn't as big as an Executor at all. It's not even as big as the Subjugator. It's a lot smaller than the Subjugator, but it's still bigger than every other large ship we've had in the game so far. And I think that it could be on the smallest scale size of what still counts as a huge ship. And but also because of the Lucrehulk, and this is the donut ship, the ones that you see in the background here. The Lucrehulk is so awkwardly shaped that it could be a different, thinking outside of the box, it could be like a left and right base, a base under each side. And I think every time I've talked about the Lucrehulk, I've kind of mentioned that I think it should be two bases, but have them side by side instead of front and back. Just because that would kind of fit the way that model works a little bit better and make it more stable. I would love to see something like that. I think that would be a lot of fun, and it would be a huge ship that handles very differently, because that would be a huge ship that's going to function primarily, first and foremost, as a carrier, and then everything else secondary. And that would be a nice change of pace from a huge ship, a nice centerpiece that's going to be a really, really robust carrier. I think it could be really, really fun and would change up the game a little bit. You kind of get that with the Executor, but most of the Executor builds that I see don't really function as a carrier first and foremost. The ones that are carriers are more jack of all trades builds, and so that's still, and there's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, but I don't want to get too far off into stuff that they'll make in the future, because I think those are also really good topics for other videos. Once we see what is actually coming, then we'll have a better informed opinion, and also what a variance of these ships also might make it into future expansions if they decide to do variant-specific expansions, which could be really cool. Now let's talk about the Republic. I think the Venator has got to be in the starter. It is the #1 most seen ship throughout the Clone Wars. It is pretty much like the Imperial Star Destroyer of the Republic. They use this in every single naval battle. It's all over the place. It's, I say every single naval battle. Somebody's going to be like, well, actually, in this naval battle, they didn't have one. I'm like, okay, but my point stands that they're abundant, and by far the most common ship for the Republic. And that's also a little bit of a problem, because when there's so many battles that had this as all of the capital ships, it starts to make you think, boy, there's really not that many more capital ships for the Republic. There are more. There's enough to keep doing. But the Venator is by far the most popular, and because it is the most popular, I think it makes sense to have it in the starter, and also as a standalone expansion pack. You can do alternate paint schemes, and of course there's going to be lots of titles, and that's one of the things they tend to do in other games. If there's, like, in the core set, for example, for the regular core set for Armada, for ships that you have in the core set have titles, but then those expansion packs for those ships have more titles, so it kind of opens up and gives you a better value. It's like, hey, let me get a second Venator, because that's going to have new titles, and now I'll have two Venators, but I'll have more options for both of them, because since they kind of complement each other, since you get that type of expansion. It just kind of fits the mold for what Armada has been doing. And I think Venator is certainly iconic enough. You're going to want something, you're going to want to grab people's attention. And I don't think you want a starter that doesn't have a Venator in it, just because this is so iconic. Then secondary, my guess is for the Consular class cruiser. This is the first ship anybody who saw anything from the Clone Wars or prequel era timeline saw, because this is the first ship we see in Episode 1. Although it was a slightly different version. This was a version without guns. It was the the peacekeeping version of this ship. But it was then, once the Clone Wars began, this was modified to have some armament, and it's a fast ship. It was, I think this one would fill very much a similar role to how a CR-90 functions for the Rebels, but it would also be different because, hey, they did also have CR-90s available to them. So I think this is the Consular class cruiser is a ship that we're going to see, and I think it'll be cheap. I think that makes it also, if we see a starter with 3 ships, 1 big one and 2 small or something like that, then we would get 2 of these and 1 of the Venators. That's kind of what I think. And also, going back to the Venator, I do think if they do a Venator, I think it's going to come in as a large ship. I don't think it'll come in as a medium ship. Because a Venator is supposed to be about 1137 meters long, 1,137 meters long. And that's close, man. That's like really in the ballpark of large ships. It's very, very close to a couple of other large ships. Now, for reference, an ISD is 1,600. Okay, now an ISD is also really, really big. Not every large ship has to be that big. For example, Home 1, for example, is only 1,200. Well, now a Venator, and Home 1 is a large base. The MC-75 that you saw in Rogue One, that one's only 1,204. So you've got multiple, like the Mon Calamari large ships are about 1,200 meters. Well, this one's only like, 63 meters shy of that at 1137. So I think it could totally work as a large ship. But the problem is it's right on the cusp of where large ships and medium ships start to have their disparage, because the Interdictor, which is the Imperial Interdictor, which is a medium ship, is at 1129. Now, the Interdictor, everything about it is borderline large ship. It's borderline. It's because it's got so much hull and it's tanky, and the physical ship is also really, really big. It's almost as big as a large ship. It's like you look at the model and you see that it could go either way. Well, since 1137 is technically just 8 more than 1129, you could make the case on where do you draw the line between medium and large ship. And I think one of the things that's going to influence that is gameplay. And also lore is going to influence it a little bit too. But gameplay, like the Interdictor might have been made a medium ship because taking certain large ship only upgrades on it might have been a little bit too powerful. Another thing to keep in mind is that the Venator, at least in canon right now, is the largest ship available to the Republic. And so if you make this a medium, then they might not ever get a large ship. Now, that might be unbalancing. And so maybe you want to make this one their large ship for balance purposes so they have access to a large ship. It's not necessarily mandatory, depending on how they build out the faction. That could be part of their faction identity, is they have no large ships. But I think it would be fair to make this a large ship. It's certainly, its size puts it at an appropriate length to still qualify as a large ship. Also, it's a little meatier than an Interdictor. While an Interdictor does have that length that puts it almost as long as this, this is definitely a beefier ship, and it's got a lot more guts to it. And I feel like the Interdictor is really only doing one job, and this is a lot more complex, a lot more versatile of a ship, and a lot more comprehensive ship. So I do think that'll be large, whereas the Consular at only 138 meters will definitely be small. Definitely be small. Now, the other ship I want to talk about also is the Acclamator, the Acclamator class assault ship. This is another really big ship that you've seen from the Clone Wars. This one is first and foremost a carrier, also a landing troop transport. This is a support ship, but at only 752 meters long, I think this one would be a medium ship. This one could easily show up, though, in the core box. Primarily, what makes me think that is because of that art that they teased at Gamma, which had an Acclamator and 2 consulars on either side of it. They could totally do that and then just save the Venator for a standalone expansion. That is a viable option based on the artwork that was released. And if that's your guess, that's probably not a bad guess. That would give you, a carrier support that's a medium size and probably a little bit tanky, with 2 fasty, shooty, dodgy ships to be flanking it and being your ship-to-ship combat, whereas your carrier is in the center or something like that. I could see that being an option. It really depends on whether or not they decide to put squadrons in these little faction starters, or have you buy the squadrons separately. And I'd be more in favor of you buying the squadrons separately, primarily because it could keep the cost down. And although at the same time, a single faction starter doesn't really teach you the full game. All right, because you won't have if it doesn't have squadrons in it, you're not going to learn about squadron stuff as much. But it's meant to be a fleet expansion. It's not meant to be a standalone game because it doesn't come with 2 factions. And that's really the biggest thing here is if you don't have an opponent to play in the game, then they can't label it as a full, complete starter. So I like the idea of a single faction starter a little bit better. And maybe they'll just do the squadrons as separate squadron packs. Speaking of squadron packs, let's talk about what I think is going to be in the squadron packs. I do think the squadron packs are going to kind of mirror the way that they've done squadron packs in Armada so far. So I think we're going to get 4 different squadrons, perhaps 2 of each in a squadron pack. And starting with the Separatists, I think this means we'll get a generic and then maybe a named or a unique variant of each one. Now, it may be that the Separatists decide to change things up and don't go with unique variants, but considering that they've already done that in X-Wing, they've already got their generics and their named variants, they have no problem trying to pull approved, unique nomenclature from droids. So I don't think they'll have too much of a problem with that. So what do I think we're going to see? Well, if we're going to follow in X-Wing's footsteps at all and also following in the patterns of previous stuff, I think for our basic fighter, we'll get our Vulture droid. I think for our basic bomber, we'll get our Hyena bomber. This is not just mimicking X-Wing, but this is also kind of mimicking Battlefront 2, since we did see a lot of stuff in Battlefront 2. I'm going to change it a little bit from Battlefront 2, though, but, we'll see. I think we'll see the Tri-Fighter for our Interceptor. We saw TIE Interceptors, and we saw A-Wings and stuff, so you do need that fasty, shooty Interceptor, and the Tri-Fighter seems to be perfect for that. And then for our Escort ship, I think you give that to the Belbalub, General Grievous's ship in Wat Tambor, that Techno-Union ship, that fancy, groovy 50s style Corvette-looking ship. But yeah, I think that one, and that one might be a single ship. You might not have a whole squadron of those, or maybe you do. I mean, it's still a small starfighter. So I think that would be our Escort in the droid faction, and if they give them droid ships any droid keywords, this one probably wouldn't get it. So you'd have all of the droid fighters fighting together while this guy is like saying, no, shoot me, let them do their calculations, or something like that. Now on to the Republic, I think our basic fighter is going to be the ARC 170. I think we could see the ARC 170 in this game being more expensive than the A-Wing and having more hull, but not necessarily having more firepower. It might even have less firepower. It might even have Escort. I'm not sure about that. But I think this one will be a little bit similar to the X-Wings, at least as far as design space is concerned. Similar, going with a bomber as my second pick, I think the BTLB Y-Wing is the obvious choice here. It's certainly iconic. It certainly mirrors the design space as well as the lore space, so it makes perfect sense. For our Interceptor, this one was a little bit tough. I think we changed things up a little bit here because I'm going with the V19 Torrent. I'm going for something that's a little, maybe not quite as fast. And we could change this up. We might be wrong here, but I think they did this in X-Wing, so I think this will come here. I think they'll want to bundle this with some other very more wanted ships. And I think this one might not be as wanted. I think these could be maybe a little bit unique, fulfilling a slightly different role. These might be much cheaper. Since your primary fighter, the ARC 170, might be a little bit more expensive, these could be cheaper interceptors, maybe even cheaper than the A-Wing, because they're kind of fragile. That may be a thing. They may be the cheapest fighter available for the Republic. And then last, we're going to go with the Delta 7, because we've got to have some Jedi in there, right? And the Delta 7 is a good starting place. You also have the ETA 2 available to Jedi, but since that seems to be coming much later in X-Wing, I think they might want to mirror that and have that in maybe a second fighter pack. I think there will be at least 2 waves of fighters that come out for the Clone Wars, because there's certainly a lot more fighters available, including the whole scum and villainy, rogues and villains kind of aspect. There's a lot of that available in this universe as well, and so I think we'll see more waves of squadron packs. But I think Delta 7 to have Jedi and squadrons would be really, really cool, and I look forward to seeing how they do that. Well, everybody, that is my predictions for the Clone Wars for Armada. I do think we're going to see some actual stuff from this pretty soon. I think at the end of July is when we will actually get our official announcement, and their mysteries will be gone. The curtain will be pulled back. We'll actually get to see some box art, some, maybe more information than we've seen leaked already, too, because there should be a Wave 1 to launch with this, because I think it was already hinted that Wave 2 is planned for first quarter 2021 release. Because this is, as of right now, as of me recording this video, this is still planned for quarter 4 2020, although that may certainly be pushed back due to everything that's happened and the fact that, well, almost everything gets pushed back nowadays. So, could certainly be the case. But I am eagerly awaiting this, and I'm sure you guys are too, so it's going to be very exciting. All right, guys, well, that's all I've got for today. I want to thank you all so much for watching. Big thanks to all the patrons. You guys are amazing, especially our new patrons. So thank you for your continued support. You guys help make this all possible, and I thank you so much. I want to thank you guys all for watching, and as always, have a great day. Have a double critical day.